I see you now. I hear your mind. The threads of fate are spooling, drawing us together. You cannot elude the future, no matter how you struggle. Set aside what you once were. Recognize that destiny awaits. Choose the path of ascension. Hey everybody, one that always bored, never boring, and what promises to be a spoiler-packed edition as I dive deep into the Blackstone Fortress Ascension expansion and reveal all the secret goodies the box contains. I actually took a spoiler-free look at the expansion in my previous video, but there seemed to be quite a bit of interest from people who wanted to see what the secret content was, because it really is where the value of the expansion lies. When you first open the expansion, the content you are greeted with is relatively minimal, and I feel it puts people in a very difficult position when it comes to whether they choose to spend £65 at retail for this expansion, because it becomes a leap of faith. This is Games Workshop at their most audacious. They are being very bold. They are trusting to the narrative. They are trusting to the commitment of players to want to see that narrative finish. And yeah, bold, but perhaps foolish, because there will be many people who look at this expansion and cannot see its true value because so much of it is veiled in secrecy. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. I am going to remove the veil and we are going to see exactly what you are getting for your money. But before I do that, a few spoiler-free comments so that this video is at least of some use to people who do not want to know what is exactly going on in this expansion. This is, of course, the culmination of the story, the Blackstone Fortress main campaign, which started with the core set and then went through escalation before ending up here in Ascension. And as far as I'm concerned, it is suitably cinematic. From a narrative perspective, I would say this is probably the most compelling and fulfilling campaign story I have ever seen. It's grand and sweeping and strangely poetic and beautiful. It has all of the beats you would expect from a cinematic, bombastic storyline. And yet, even as the story becomes greater than the confines of the box, it turns inwards. It makes the adventure smaller in some ways and more character-driven, more character-focused. It becomes something where you do invest in particular characters. Certain characters will become more important to you, and then as things happen to them, that will become more gut-wrenching for you. It's incredibly clever, incredibly well constructed. You are looking at storytelling that is really beyond the scope of a board game. If you have been playing through Blackstone Fortress and you have felt that sometimes the plot is a little bit meandering and seems to sort of bounce around and doesn't really know where it's going, this plot has always known where it's going. If you've played through the campaign and you've been thinking, oh, it's annoying that chaos is the main focus all the time. It's always about chaos. It's not about the Blackstone Fortress. No, it is about the Blackstone Fortress. It's always been about the Blackstone Fortress. This has always been a story about the primordial horrors of the universe. There is something out there that is grander than the dark gods. And everything does tie together. Everything does link into a very satisfying conclusion. To say more, I would have to start stepping into spoilers, which we're saving for a little bit later in the video. For now, I guess the final thing to say to those people who don't want to know anything other than my initial thoughts on this, I think this box is worth the money. Now, I paid £52 rather than the £65 retail, so that's something people should keep in mind when I say that, but I am certainly not disappointed with how I have invested my money. And yes, you are not getting a lot of plastic in the box, you are only getting those 2 Guardian drones, which I will be assembling in a future video. But the additional gameplay content, the additional value that is brought through this expansion, and the real focus in the end of tying together everything that's happened, tying together the narrative, focusing on the characters in a really compelling way. And this is before I even play through this expansion, bear in mind. I have done something that I've never done with Blackstone Fortress before. In all of the previous expansions there has been secret content, and I have never revealed that secret content to myself until I have actually won it through gameplay. This time I made the exception, for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to see what I'd spent my money on, because you do get a sense that you're not getting great value when you first open that box, but also I've felt that it is worth diving into to let people know that is there something more, or is it all smoke and mirrors? Have Games Workshop just said, oh, there's loads of extra content, but really there isn't? And I'm very pleased to say that it is not smoke and mirrors. So for me, the value is there. Yes, I would have liked a couple more spindle drones on that Guardian drone sprue, but that's okay, I can live with that. So that's my intro, that's where the spoiler-free territory of this video ends. From this point out, I am going to spoil pretty much everything, and I'm going to do it in 2 stages. I am going to do an overview of what extra gameplay you're getting, and then I am actually going to step through the whole experience, because it is an experience and it's very unusual and it's almost scripted. So if you don't want to know anything, now's the time to go. Thank you for listening to me ramble this far, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Okay, have you gone? Has everybody gone who doesn't want spoilers? Spoilers. Here on out, spoilers. Last warning, spoilers. For so long we lived in the fortress's shadow. It was vast, impossibly vast, a celestial giant. It seemed timeless, eternal, as though it had always been there, silent and somnolent. When it turned on us, it was like some titan from a bygone age scratching unthinkingly at an itch. We realized we had been living on the back of a being bigger than stars. In that moment, everything changed. We stared into the abyss, and it consumed us. Right, I've had my Amdram moment. Still with me? Okay, let's get into this. If you watched my previous video, you will know that this is a box of 2 halves, although that is something of a misnomer. You will first play through the Edge of the Abyss part of the expansion, and I called it a fake out in my previous video, but it's probably more of a tutorial. It's a very slim adventure which represents this moment where the Blackstone Fortress awakens. The Blackstone Fortress starts to draw precipice into its gravity, and anybody trying to escape precipice is destroyed. Your small group of adventurers gets inside Blackstone Fortress and has one chance to find out what's going on. Once you complete that adventure, there is a secret envelope which will grant you a gift, which I will reveal in a moment, and then you open the actual expansion. The adventure that you're presented with is comparable to the original adventure in the core box. Furthermore, you are getting completely new mechanisms. You are getting a new type of mechanism that focuses on the characters in the party and their developing distrust of each other. You are also getting a completely new tower defense minigame. Once you've played through this whole extra campaign, there is another secret envelope, and that secret envelope has a new character in it. Well, I say new. And then beyond that, having completed the campaign, you get a whole new game experience, because you can use the original rules for one-off dungeon delves from the core rulebook in association with the fragment cards and the rules as presented in this expansion, to play a completely new type of one-off dungeon delve, where you use the rolling combat, rolling road style of exploration rather than using the return to precipice. Oh, and for those people who are worried about the fact that it doesn't seem like you can return to precipice in this expansion, you can. Or you can return to bits of it. So that's what this expansion is bringing to the table. It is bringing a satisfying conclusion to the narrative. It is bringing a whole new core box worth of missions to the table. It is bringing new game mechanisms, including a tower defense minigame, and a completely new way to play one-off dungeon delves. There is so much content in this box. If it had had miniatures in it, it would have been a new core set for a new game. They could have actually released this as Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress 2. If that sounds good to people, and they don't want to know any more, this is your second point to duck out of this video, because now we're going to start looking at the specifics, the nitty-gritty of this expansion. I came here in search of truth that might offer hope to a people beset by darkness. We have seen so much, horrors and wonders in equal measure. Yet for all we have learned, the fortress itself keeps its secrets close. I fear it may be beyond understanding. At the start of your playthrough of Ascension, you will play the quest to endure. This is a quest in which you are attempting to find out why the Blackstone Fortress has awakened. You will fight your way through 3 of the fragment cards, and then you will find a stronghold. And it should probably come as little surprise that the person at least partly responsible for what is going on is our good friend Obsidius Mallex. He's right there on the cover of the book and the cover of the box. Good going with the spoilers, Games Workshop. And it is important to note that when you begin this campaign, you have to select the 2 adventurers who have the augmetics. Now, if you've got this far in the video, then I guess you already know that the augmetics are the secret envelope prizes for completing the core box and for completing escalation. And at the time they were first revealed, they seemed quite strange to me, because the augmetics give one of the characters a permanent special ability that is incredibly overpowered, and furthermore, they become invincible, they become immortal, they can never die. And that seemed a bit much at the time, but it just so happens that that was an early thread to weave into the larger plot. By this time, you have 2 of these augmented characters that kind of have a sense of what the Blackstone Fortress is doing. They have some kind of connection to it. They can't understand its motivations, but they seem to have some kind of better understanding of how it's doing what it's doing. And that will eventually breed dissent and distrust among the group. So eventually you will find the repository, which is the stronghold for this part of the quest. And it seems very so-so. It seems very lackluster, very everyday. It's nothing we haven't seen before. We have a map layout, and we have units positioned on the board. We have Obsidius Mallex at the final part of the map with one of the Guardian drones. And of course, with Obsidius Mallex, we are using his empowered card from Escalation, which is one of the reasons why you need that expansion, along with the need for the floor tiles. In order to complete this stronghold, you have to get to Obsidius Mallex and the Guardian drone, kill them both to try and stop what they are doing, and then one of the characters who is not augmented has to stand down here in the Ascension chamber. That will complete the mission and unlock the secret envelope. Here's the secret envelope. Inside is another augmentation. It's the augmetic of control. What that actually does, in terms of rules, is irrelevant really. Because what it means is we now have 3 augmented heroes. We have 3 characters who all have some kind of connection to the Blackstone Fortress. And let's not forget Obsidius Mallex. He had of course already gained his augmentation by the time we met him for the second time in Escalation, which is why we can't seem to keep the man dead. That completes your introduction, which is like a pre-credit sequence to a whole adventure film. Because we don't need this book anymore. We need this one. This is the proper book. This is the proper expansion. And this is the point where things go horribly wrong for everyone. This is the first moment in the expansion where Games Workshop give you a hefty punch in the gut. Despite taking down Obsidius Mallex again, despite gaining access to the Ascension chamber, you don't save Precipice. Precipice is sucked into the Blackstone Fortress and consumed by it, and most of the people on it die. Your group of heroes are trapped in the Blackstone Fortress with nowhere to go and no way to get out. There is no longer any jollies back to the shop. Precipice is gone, destroyed, and you are lost in the belly of the beast. You open this book and you immediately start playing the next adventure, which happens to be the quest for the Shattered Precipice. You will set up a new set of fragment cards as you did with the quest to endure, but it will be different cards based on the rules in this book. And furthermore, we are introduced to a brand new mechanism that will be in place for the rest of the game. We are introduced to desperation cards, which is a wonderful new addition to the rules, which reflects that sense of growing unease and distrust. All these people are trapped in the darkness together. Some of them have these weird augmentations, which means they cannot die and they cannot sleep, and they have visions of things that they can't understand, and then they have to go out on missions with people who don't have those augmentations and who can no longer trust them because they feel like they are part of the fortress. You get a pretty hefty wedge of desperation cards, and I am not going to go through them all in this video. I'm going to keep most of them as a surprise for you. But the interesting thing is, many of them are bad, and some of them are good. And they come into play as a way of avoiding taking a grievous wound, because you can't very easily remove grievous wounds from this point out, because you can't just return to Precipice and get healed up. So when you would take a grievous wound, you can instead draw a desperation card, and that desperation card will stay with that character for the rest of the game, or until a rule says that you can remove one. And as I said, some of them are good, a lot of them are bad, some of them are for specific characters. So when you, and this is funny, when you choose to pick a desperation card instead of taking a grievous wound, there is a chance that you will pull a card that is for another member of your party. And if that's the case, you give them the desperation card. So you get away scot-free. You just take a regular wound instead of a grievous wound. And the desperation card gets applied to your friend. So there is a potential to generate some real annoying moments where you throw people under the bus without intending to. If you are the character, then obviously you get to keep the card, and if there is no character mentioned, then you keep the card. But if another character is mentioned, you have to give the card to them. I'm only going to show you two, just to give you a taste of what they are, but we have one here which is Mutual Distrust, which is specifically for Janus Drake, and it says, Janus Drake cannot provide covering fire for Naem Shai Murad. They cannot swap positions on the combat track. So that's a big one. If you've got those two characters in play at the same time, they have fallen out. They no longer trust each other and will not play nicely together. Another example of a card that is not for a specific character is this one, Shaken, which simply says, this explorer cannot make aimed weapon actions. And these are permanent. As I said, there are some good ones in there. There are certain cards that will give a character a new ability. There are certain cards that work well for creating teams. If you've got Thaddeus, Vaughn, and the Crusader Gottfried in a team together, one of these cards makes them more effective because they are all on the same page in terms of burning the heretics or stabbing them with great big swords. This is a really, really fun idea. It's a really interesting way to build character development into the gameplay. It's a way of reflecting that narrative. You are now well and truly up the creek, and these cards are a gameplay way to show that growing unease and that increased sense of everything is falling apart around you. Permanent debuffs, but sometimes permanent buffs that reflect you digging deep and trying even harder. And over time, those are going to build up on your characters, and in association with those augmentations that certain characters have been picking up, you are going to increasingly start to care about these characters as they become more fleshed out in a way that they haven't really up to this point in the game. Obviously, you've always got that chance of building a character the way you want. You keep returning to Precipice and buying certain items, but now you're getting an extra layer of character building and a new mechanism that reflects that sense of an uneasy alliance from people thrown together in a terrible situation. But that's not all, because at this point the game also introduces a new salvage mechanism. When you are exploring the fragment cards, certain cards will show spots on the board where there are salvage tokens, and if you go over to one of those salvage tokens, you can explore it with a 4+ discovery action, the same way as if you were exploring on a discovery token, and then you get to draw one of these salvage cards. And I'm not going to show you all of them in the video, but there is basically one card for every single ship that you may have met on your journey. So there is all of the ones from the core game, all of the ones from Escalation, and all of the ones that are associated with expansions and content that is revealed from completing certain expansions. And these cards are one-use cards. You use them and then they get shuffled back into the salvage deck, so they may turn up again. But they represent a bit of one of those ships that was on Precipice. They represent bits of Precipice that have been consumed or destroyed and scattered throughout the labyrinth of the Blackstone Fortress. And each card gives you a watered-down version of what the ship used to give you. So, for example, we have the Remnant of Ultimatum here, which says you may discard this card when an encounter card is drawn. If you do so, that encounter card is shuffled back into the encounter deck and another encounter is drawn instead. So this is a way to still have access to those abilities that the ships on Precipice used to give you, but in a more thematic and narrative way, but also in a way which is quite sad. These ships have been with you throughout all of your adventures, docked on Precipice, helping you out. When you go back to Precipice, they're your stores where you can go and buy new things and trade with other people. And now suddenly they're just scraps in the Blackstone Fortress that you might be able to scramble a few bits and pieces of them together to get a one-use benefit out of them. Again, a really interesting concept and a way of still giving players a chance to have access to extra abilities even though Precipice is gone. But that's not all, folks, because at this point you also get a new wedge of challenge cards, and because we have the rolling combat system, these are all challenge cards. None of these are combat maps at all, and none of them are replacement cards or swap out cards for cards you already have. These are all new challenges, most of which have the purple icon, which means they are specifically for use with the Ascension expansion, although there are also some black symbols in there, which means you can use those in one-off dungeon delves as well. It's really nice to see extra challenges, and again, I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to leave a lot of these as fun things for people to find out, but they really do reflect the situation you're in. So the quest for the Shattered Precipice starts out with exploring through the fragments. You have the new desperation cards, you have the new salvage cards, you have the new challenge cards, and eventually you will find an exit point. And when you find an exit point, you immediately go to another stronghold. This is where it gets really interesting, because the stronghold you find is actually an access point to the remnants of Precipice. It is the place where the survivors of this devastating event have all hidden away, deep in the heart of the Blackstone Fortress, beset by the forces of chaos. And you have to fight your way through the chaos hordes, defend the Precipice access point to complete this part of the quest. This is your first taste of the new tower defense minigame. The mission is called Take and Hold, and you will place your adventurers in the center of the board around the access hatch to the remains of Precipice, and you will have enemies coming in from all sides, and you have to survive. You have to kill all of the hostiles, you have to make sure there are no hostiles on the board at all, and then you have to have at least one explorer on the Precipice tile. If you do that, then you have successfully defended the access point, you have found your allies, you will then have access to all of the other adventurers again, because up until this point you've only been able to use whoever went on the quest to endure. And now you have a base of operations. And now the next quest begins. And this is where you get a whole core set worth of extra missions. This is your final quest, the quest for salvation. You are not venturing out into the Blackstone Fortress for riches, you are venturing out to find a way to save your lives and the lives of everybody trapped inside the fortress with you. You basically have a device which was on Precipice, which you still have with you in the Blackstone Fortress, and if you can find enough power sources to fire it up, then it is possible to teleport the remains of Precipice out of the Blackstone Fortress and fire it off into space. You're effectively skimming it like a stone across the warpway. So you have no idea where it's going to end up, but it won't be inside the Blackstone Fortress anymore. And wherever you're going to end up has got to be better than that. And to achieve this, you have to find a series of strongholds. There are 3 strongholds. Each stronghold will give you access to 2 resonators, and you need those resonators to complete the mission. To find the strongholds, you need to gather clues. So you will go out on expeditions, as you did in the core set adventure, and you are using the new fragment cards rather than the original type of exploration. And as you're going around, you look at the discovery tokens, you accumulate clues. When you've got 4 clues, you can make an attempt on a stronghold. And because you now have a base of operations, you can return to Precipice whenever you want to. Of course, that means we have a new legacy deck. We have a brand new set of legacy cards, new terrible things that will happen, and if at any point your legacy deck runs out, your attempt for freedom, for salvation, has failed. So we are very much in the realms of the adventure from the original core set in terms of how this all operates. But of course, returning to the shattered remnants of Precipice is not the same as returning to a fully functioning orbiting space station as you have in the past. So the things you can do at Precipice are somewhat limited. One of the things you can do is stockpile archaeotech. The archaeotech you find as you explore, you can cash it in for the face value of the cards, and you need to stockpile for 2 reasons. One, to mount defenses against the Chaos forces when they attack Precipice, but also you have to have a certain amount of stockpiled archaeotech before you can face the final challenge. The other thing you can do at Precipice is rearm, which involves shuffling together all of the resource cards you have from all of the ships, because everything is a jumbled mess now, and you will deal out 6, and each explorer can pick 1 resource card. Once you have stockpiled and rearmed, you mount a new mission. As you set out on your missions, at certain points in the game, you will come under attack from Chaos forces, and you will have to play that tower defense minigame, you will have to defend Precipice on 3 separate occasions, and each occasion offers a different challenge. But you can mitigate that challenge by using your stockpiled resources. Like in all good tower defense games, you can build extra defenses, and this is where all those groovy looking overlay tokens come into play. First of all, in each of the defense missions, you will have a number of resonators to protect. The first time you defend against attacks, you will have recovered 2 resonators. The second time you fend off an attack, you will have acquired 4, and then there will be a final push to destroy you at the end of the game when you will have all 6 resonators that you need to complete your mission to teleport Precipice out of the Blackstone. And these are positioned on the board, and enemies will treat them as explorers and attack them, and if they destroy them, then you fail in your mission to protect Precipice. It doesn't mean it's the end of the game. You suffer some penalties and then you continue with your quest. You basically lose all of your stockpiled goodies. And you need those stockpiled goodies because at the start of every tower defense game, you get to spend all of your stockpile on extra defenses. You can purchase turret guns, which will operate after the leader each round and target approaching hostiles. You can purchase medical labs, which will give you an opportunity to heal if you're standing on them. You can purchase barricades, which act as cover. You can purchase force fields, which allow you to re-roll your failed defense dice. And you can purchase tunnels, which will allow you to move between access points on the board to more rapidly reach areas where you are under attack. And the interesting thing is, at the start of each defense, you purchase those particular items, and you can purchase them in whatever combination you want and whatever combination you can afford. But you're not really spending the stockpile points because they will still roll over to your next mission. So if during your first defense you have 10 stockpile points, you can purchase 10 points worth of defenses. And then at the end of that defense, if you were successful, you keep all of your stockpile points. And then the next time you go out adventuring and you acquire stockpile, you will add it to that 10 still. And then say you've got 20 points by the time you do your second defense, you will get to purchase a new combination of defenses up to a value of 20 points. You don't have to keep the ones you bought the first time, and the stockpile points aren't locked into that in any way. I will show you the maps for the 3 defense missions because they are all unique, but before I do, I'm going to show you the 3 strongholds that you need to defeat in order to acquire resonators, because it's actually completing these missions and acquiring the resonators that will trigger the defenses, and the final encounter you have will be the last desperate defense of Precipice as you put your plan into action. So it makes more sense to look at them this way round. The first stronghold is called The Hunt. This one you're facing Guardian drones, Spindle drones and Urgles. You need to move across the board, grab a Resonator Matrix token and get it back to your maglev. What is interesting about this particular mission is you have 2 Guardian drones called the Sentinel and the Stalker. The Sentinel doesn't move, at least until he sees you, and the Stalker will always just move 2 spaces towards the closest explorer. So you actually have a situation where you can creep around without attracting the attention of the Guardian drones, and this is assisted because there is a special stay low rule which says that you treat cover hex sides as walls when you are rolling for the behavior roll of Guardian drones. In other words, as long as you stay behind cover, the Guardian drones can't see you. So you get this really interesting cat and mouse situation where you scurry around in the dark, trying not to get spotted by the Guardian drones, because once they do see you, then they will fully awaken and they will just come at you as normal. This mission also tells you to have all reinforcement rolls, which means you are much more likely to get new enemies coming onto the board. The second stronghold is called Collapse. Once again, you are trying to collect a Resonator Matrix token and you need to get it to a maglev heavy transport chamber to escape. What is fun about this particular mission is that the board is gradually disintegrating. As you start out, the arrival maglev will disintegrate, and then you will place an unstable token on every tile adjacent to the one that was just taken, and then on the next turn, any tiles that have unstable tokens on them will also be removed. So on turn 1, you will lose the arrival chamber, then you will lose this corridor here, and then you will lose both of those tiles, and then both of those tiles and that tile, and gradually it will just expand outwards until everything is gone. It's like a scene from the never-ending story or something. The final stronghold is called the Remnant Vault. As with the first 2 strongholds, you need to collect a Resonator Matrix token, and you need to take it to the vault, and then you need to lock down the vault so that you're safe. The gimmick here is that reinforcement rolls always succeed. They're always treated as being a roll of a 2, so every time you kill something, it's going to come back onto the board on the very next turn. You are going to have Urgles, Negavolt cultists and a Guardian Drone constantly breathing down your neck. So those are your 3 strongholds. You find those strongholds by going out on expeditions and accumulating the clue tokens, and then returning to Precipice, spending the clue tokens, and then going off on a stronghold. And as with all of the strongholds, there are access routes, but these are access routes that use the fragment cards, and each mission will tell you which symbols to take out of the fragment decks to shuffle together and to make your access route. The other 3 missions detailed in the book are your defense missions. The first defense mission is called Hammer Blow. You don't have an access route for these because obviously they represent you just about to leave Precipice when a horde of chaos enemies approach. For this first defense, you only have 2 resonators on the board. They're here and here, and you start in the center, of course. The enemies come in from the edges, and there are Chaos Space Marines coming with melter bombs, and they can use those melter bombs to destroy your resonators, as well as doing regular normal attacks on the resonators to take them out of action. You will succeed in your defense if you can fend off the enemies without losing both of your resonators. And if you do lose a resonator, just the one, then you will have to pay stockpile points to repair it, and if you lose both, then you will lose all of your stockpile points. The second mission is Breachers, and this time the bad guys have brought siege drills. You now have 4 resonators on the board to protect. They are here, 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 and here, and there are 2 drills coming in here. And over time, the siege drills are going to build up drill tokens, which represent them drilling through the sides of Precipice to get to the civilians inside. We're thinking the final showdown in the Matrix here. You have to defend the resonators and destroy both siege drills before they get through and wreck your day. Finally, once you have all 6 resonators and a great big pile of stockpile tokens, you can activate the resonators to start the process of teleporting Precipice out of the Blackstone Fortress. But at that moment, Obsidious Mallex comes back one last time with the remnants of his forces. So you basically have a situation where you have a constant stream of different hostile groups coming onto the board. At certain points, Guardian Drones will arrive, and then eventually at the end, Obsidious Mallex will arrive. If you can survive, keep at least 2 of your resonators operational, kill Obsidious Mallex, kill the Guardian Drones, then you will ultimately be successful and Precipice will be teleported out of Blackstone. And that is your win point. And that is the point where you get to open the final envelope in the game. This is the envelope. And I guess at this point, this is your last chance to duck out of this video if you don't want to know the final gut punch that this game gives you. Still want to know? Well, here's the deal. Precipice does get teleported out of the Blackstone Fortress, and it does get fired across space and time. But you don't really know where it goes. You don't really know if anybody survives. You don't really know if your efforts have been in vain or not, because you're still stuck on the Blackstone Fortress. Any characters who are not augmented are probably doomed to a horrible, painful death. But those characters that are augmented, and that includes Obsidious Mallex, they ascend. They become a part of the Blackstone Fortress. They become part of its defenses, part of its legacy, part of its story. The Blackstone Fortress travels off through space with you and Obsidious Mallex on board, roaming the corridors endlessly for the rest of time. Want to see what's in the envelope? First of all, you get this, which says read this first. You get a final piece of text which tells you what you have achieved, what you think you have achieved, and where you have failed. We are left with a final piece of text which explains how you have finally recognised that you have a greater purpose as part of the Blackstone Fortress. And perhaps when the fortress arrives at its destination, you might be able to fulfill that purpose. In the meantime, you can use the rules here after the quest, which explain how you can incorporate various cards from this expansion into your core experience and into your one-off dungeon delves. Because ultimately, what this leaflet tells you is that your quest will never end. You will continue to explore the Blackstone Fortress. But hey, at least you don't have to do it alone. And it's always nice to make new friends, isn't it? And that's Blackstone Fortress Ascension, a deeply thematic, exciting, almost harrowing experience which takes your players on a real adventure and takes them to a point of desperation and then chucks them over the edge into the abyss. I think it is a fantastic, fantastic way to complete this narrative. Perhaps the only way this narrative could have been completed. There was never going to be a happy ending for these characters. Some of them have become enlightened. The Ascension is indeed not the ascension of the Blackstone Fortress. It is the ascension of the adventurers who have been touched by the fortress and converted. There's a huge amount of content, a huge amount of story, a huge amount of replayability. It really is a very, very exciting expansion, and it's audacious and it's bold and it's a little bit silly. It is Games Workshop at their show-offy best. And where do we go from here? There is almost a cliffhanger ending which suggests the Blackstone Fortress is travelling off to fulfill some kind of destiny. I don't think that explains where the next Warhammer Quest will go. I think you are effectively left with your augmented heroes and Obsidious Maleks travelling through the galaxy on the Blackstone Fortress, wandering the corridors as sentient guards, whilst the Blackstone Fortress completes an objective that is beyond the imagining of mortals, something so grand and cosmic in its scope they couldn't fit it into a board game. I think the Blackstone Fortress is gone, vanished, removed from the timeline and the storyline. I don't think we will follow the adventures there. What I think this game may have done, and what this expansion may have set up, is a Lost in Space story for Precipice. Precipice teleported out of the Blackstone Fortress, and they make a point of saying in the fluff that they don't know where they're going or where they're going to end up, and they're effectively skimming off of the warp to end up at some point, with the intention being to appear somewhere, get back to the Imperium, warn them of the Blackstone Fortress. I don't think they're going to get back to the Imperium. I think we've created a situation where Precipice could pop up somewhere else and become the base of operation for a whole new series of quests in a whole new location, in a whole new part of the galaxy. I think we've got Warhammer Quest Lost in Space. But hey, I'm usually wrong. At this point, I think I've pretty much showed you everything that this expansion has to offer. You get a few extra swap out cards in this part of the expansion. There's a new encounter card for Chaos Beastmen. There's a couple of extra resource cards that you swap out because, again, they don't work with the new rules. And you get a couple of Stronghold cards to mark when you complete them. But that's it. But it is a fully formed, well-rounded expansion with an excellent amount of content in it, regardless of the lack of miniatures. I'm impressed, but I think at this point I have talked for long enough, and I may well be talking to myself by this point. So I'm going to go. If you are still with me at this point, thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. You, who have been marked, awaken in the transference vault. You realize the fortress is moving, though you do not understand how you know this. You know so much now. Here, at the heart of the fortress, you see each other for what you truly are. Your old allegiances, your old lives, live on as memories, but each of you has passed beyond what came before. You recognize your greater purpose. Perhaps, when the fortress arrives at its destination, you might fulfill it. Elsewhere in the vault, another pair of eyes opens. Eyes that burn with a fiery resolve. Malix rises to his feet, addressing you directly. Come. Our journey begins now. We have so much to achieve.